He built this place to set people free, but today someone called it a trap. David Carter sat alone in his car. Rain tapped softly on the windshield. He stared at the glowing ironwood grill sign. His sign, his dream. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. 30 years ago, he opened his first steak stand with nothing but hope and fire. Now he was about to walk into his own restaurant as a stranger. He pulled his cap low and stepped out. The cold air bit at his face. Inside, warm lights and laughter hid silent truths. Narrator, he thought he knew his people. Until a waitress said 4 words that broke him. This place is a trap. His chest burned. His stomach sank. He had no idea. Everything was about to change. David pushed the heavy glass door open. Warm air and the smell of grilled steak wrapped around him. He nodded at the young hostess by the podium. "Table for 1, he said, voice low. She smiled politely and grabbed a menu. "Right this way, sir." As he followed her, his eyes moved across the room. He saw a cook behind the open kitchen window wiping sweat off his brow. A busboy rushed by carrying a tub of dirty dishes. Water dripped onto his shoes. A server in a black apron stood at table 6, trying to smile as guests complained about cold fries. David felt his chest tighten. These were his people. But tonight they felt like strangers. He sat down at a booth by the window. Outside, rain ran down the glass like tears. Narrator, for years he thought he knew them. Tonight he would see the truth. David leaned back in his seat. His eyes blurred as memories rose. He saw himself at 25, young, determined, broke. He stood behind a small grill on a street corner. Smoke curled into the night sky. His hands moved fast, flipping steaks, seasoning each cut with care. Customers lined up, cash in hand, drawn by the smell of fire and meat. He remembered the first time someone said, "This is the best steak I've ever had." That night he closed the stand at midnight. He counted $22 in tips. He walked home under the stars feeling like the richest man alive. Narrator, back then he worked for every dollar. Back then every face was family. David blinked. The memory faded. He was back in his booth, watching his empire, wondering when it stopped feeling like home. David watched as a young waitress walked by his table. Her name tag read Emily. She carried a heavy tray loaded with plates of steak, fries, and drinks. Her arms shook under the weight. One glass slipped, clinking against another. She winced but kept walking. Her black, non-slip shoes were worn down at the heels. A strand of hair fell from her bun, sticking to her damp cheek. She reached table 9 and set down each plate with quiet care. "Here you go, sir. Medium rare steak with garlic mash." Her voice was calm, but her eyes looked tired. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, rubbing her wrist as she moved away. Narrator, Emily Johnson, 24 years old, working 12-hour shifts to survive. David felt something tighten deep in his chest. He didn't know her story, but soon he would. Emily stepped behind the counter for a moment. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small worn wallet. Inside was a photo. A little boy with sandy hair and bright eyes smiled up at her. He wore a red t-shirt with a dinosaur print. His name was Liam. She traced his face with her thumb. For a second, her shoulders dropped. Her eyes softened. Then she sighed and put the photo back. She grabbed a clean rag and began wiping down the counter, moving fast, focused again. Narrator, every extra shift, every aching muscle, it was all for him. David watched from his booth. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her pain. But in that single look, he saw the truth. This wasn't just a job for her. It was survival. Emily hurried back to table 4 with 2 glasses of iced tea. As she set them down, her manager walked past. He stopped and glared at her. "Move faster, Emily. Table 12 has been waiting 10 minutes. His voice was sharp and cold. She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He shook his head. "You're lucky to even have this job." Emily turned away. Her eyes burned, but she blinked back the tears. She grabbed a tray of dirty dishes and walked to the back. David watched the whole scene. His jaw tightened. Narrator, he built this place to give people hope, but watching her now, all he saw was fear. Emily set the tray down in the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron. Then she whispered something under her breath. The words that David almost didn't hear. Words that would change everything. David opened the menu. His hands felt heavy as he flipped each page. When Emily returned, he spoke softly. "I'll have the ribeye. Medium rare. Side of garlic mash." She nodded, writing quickly. "Thank you, sir. It'll be out soon." As she walked away, David looked past her. Through the open kitchen window, he saw the grill line. Flames rose under thick cuts of meat. A cook wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. His white apron was stained dark with grease and sauce. Steam curled up around his face. He moved aft, flipping steaks, dropping fries into bubbling oil. Beside him, another cook chopped herbs, his knuckles red and raw. Narrator. The kitchen was alive with fire and noise, but behind each movement, there was exhaustion. David's chest tightened. This was his kitchen. These were his people. But tonight something felt wrong. David kept his eyes on the kitchen. The grill cook pulled out a large ribeye from a plastic tub. He sniffed it and frowned. "It smells off," he muttered. Just then the manager walked in behind him. He glanced at the meat, then at the cook. "Don't waste it," the manager said. His voice was low but firm. "Sir, it's turning gray." The manager leaned closer. "Just burn it a little. Customers won't notice." The cook hesitated, staring at the steak in his gloved hands. The manager crossed his arms. "Do it, or I'll find someone who will." The cook sighed and placed the meat on the hot grill. Smoke rose thick and dark. David felt his stomach twist. Narrator. He built ironwood on quality and trust. Now they served rot disguised with flame. His fingers curled into a fist under the table. Something inside him started to break. Emily walked into the back office during her short break. The manager sat behind the desk, typing on his phone. He looked up without smiling. "Emily, sit down." She sat, hands folded in her lap. He slid a paper across the desk. "What's this?" she asked softly. "Company policy update," he said. "Sign it." She scanned the first lines. Her eyes widened. It was a waiver, a no-lawsuit agreement if she got hurt or fired. Her throat felt tight. I don't understand. Why now?" The manager sighed. "It's standard. You want to keep working here, right?" She looked down at her shaking hands. The pen felt heavy between her fingers. Narrator. "Yep, true. 12 hours a day, minimum wage, no benefits, and now no rights." Emily signed. She stood up and left the room without a word. David watched her pass by, her eyes glassy, her step slow. His heart sank deeper into his chest. David's eyes drifted back to the kitchen. A young line cook poured a basket of fries into bubbling oil. Suddenly, hot oil splashed onto his forearm. He gasped in pain and stepped back. Red blisters rose quickly on his skin. He ran cold water over the burn, breathing fast through clenched teeth. The kitchen manager walked by and glanced at his arm. "Wrap it up and get back to the line," he said without stopping. "But I think it's bad," the cook whispered. "No insurance here. You want a doctor, pay for it yourself." The cook's shoulders dropped. He grabbed a roll of gauze from the first aid box. His hands shook as he wrapped the burn. Narrator. In this place, pain was part of the job. Help was a luxury no one could afford. David felt anger rising in his chest. This wasn't his vision. This was abuse. How many workplaces are trapped and you don't even see them? David sat frozen in his booth. Around him, customers laughed over sizzling steaks and glasses of red wine. The hostess smiled as she greeted a new table. The kitchen burned bright with flames and noise, but under that shine, pain hid in silence. Emily walked by carrying another heavy tray. The young cook pressed his burned arm against his apron, working without a word. The manager typed on his phone, not looking at anyone. Narrator. In the next few minutes, David Carter will discover the truth behind his empire. A truth most owners never hear. David exhaled slowly. His food arrived. He looked down at this perfect ribeye, juices pooling under the charred crust. He felt nothing. All he saw were the tired faces working behind the flames. Emily walked over to refill David's water glass. Her hands moved quickly but gently. David looked up at her tired eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. She nodded, forcing a small smile. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "How's work here?" "For you." Emily blinked, surprised. No customer had ever asked her that. She looked around to check if the manager was watching. Then she shrugged. "It's fine, sir." Her voice was flat, empty. She poured the water until it almost spilled over. He noticed the small burn mark on her wrist, the faded name tag pinned to her apron, the cracked rubber on her work shoes. Narrator. David saw everything, but her eyes said more than her words. Emily set down the pitcher and walked away. David watched her go, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. Emily returned to collect David's empty plate. He looked up at her, his voice low. "You can be honest with me. How is it... really?" She froze for a moment. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. She glanced at the manager standing near the bar, typing on his phone. Then she leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This place—" She paused, her eyes down on the table. "It's a trap." David felt his chest tighten. Emily quickly straightened up. "Thank you for dining with us, sir," she said louder. She turned and walked away without looking back. Narrator: choice 4 words. Words he never expected to hear. Words that cut deeper than any insult. David sat still. The restaurant buzzed around him, but inside he felt only silence and guilt. 4 words. Words that froze David Carter in his seat. He stared at the spot where Emily had stood. Her whisper echoed in his mind. "This place is a trap." David looked around the restaurant, the smiling hostess greeting new guests, the kitchen crew moving under harsh yellow lights, the manager checking his phone, untouched by the weight in the room. He saw everything with new eyes. He saw tired shoulders, forced meals, and silent pain. Narrator: he so be built of ironwood to give people a future, but somewhere along the way, it became a prison. David felt his hands tremble. A heaviness pressed on his chest. The smell of steak and garlic butter turned sour in his nose. He closed his eyes for a moment. All he could see was Emily's downcast face and hear her words. "This place is a trap." Emily walked quickly to the back hall. Her chest felt tight. Her eyes burned. She leaned against the gray wall near the staff lockers. For a moment, she closed her eyes. A memory flashed in her mind. Megan's voice. Megan had been her friend since her first day here. Last week, Emily broke down during their break. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, tears falling. Megan reached out and held her hand. "Emily, if you quit," she said softly, "who will fight for us?" Emily shook her head, wiping her tears. "I'm just tired, Megan." "I know," Megan replied. Her eyes were wet too. "But you're strong, stronger than you think." The memory faded. Emily opened her eyes, breathing hard. Narrator: she wanted to leave, but something or someone kept her here. David stood in the restroom, staring at his reflection. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed above him. He saw deep lines carved into his face. His gray hair curled under his cap. He didn't look like the man on magazine covers. He didn't feel like the founder of Ironwood Grill. Water dripped from a leaking tap into the sink. Each drop echoed in the silent room. He took off his cap and ran a hand through his hair. His eyes looked tired, heavy. Narrator: he built an empire from nothing, but tonight he didn't see success. He saw failure. David leaned closer to the mirror. His voice was barely a whisper. "What have I done to this place? What have I done to them?" His chest tightened as he breathed in the cold, sterile air. For the first time in years, David Carter felt afraid. David left the restroom and walked slowly past the manager's office. The door was slightly open. Inside, the manager stood near his desk counting a stack of cash. David paused, listening. The manager pulled open a locked drawer. He took out an envelope marked "Tip Pool." He stuffed half the cash into his own pocket. Then he placed the rest in the envelope and closed the drawer. David felt his jaw tighten. Narrator: every dollar mattered to his staff. Every tip was hope, food, rent. The manager glanced at the small security camera mounted in the corner. He smirked and walked out, locking the drawer behind him. David stared at the camera's blinking red light. A quiet rage burned in his chest. Narrator: David always believed in the trust, but trust, without watching, becomes blind. He turned away, his mind racing with questions. David returned to his booth. His mind was clear, but his plan was set. He waved to Emily. "Can I get a whiskey? Neat." She nodded and brought him a small glass. He took a sip, letting the burn settle in his chest. Then he ordered another, and another. Soon his eyes looked heavy. His head drooped forward. The manager walked by and noticed. "Hey, sir," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Everything okay tonight?" David slurred his words slightly. "This, play, it's, great," the manager chuckled. "Good to hear. Enjoy your drink." David let out a small laugh. "Bet you, make a lot of money here." The manager shrugged. "Enough." David leaned closer, his voice low and slow. "Enough to take a little extra, huh?" The manager's smile faded for a moment. Then he forced a laugh. "Sir, you should get some rest." Narrator: David pretended to be drunk, but he saw everything. David sat quietly, staring into his empty glass. Around him, the restaurant buzzed with noise and light, laughter at table 6, the sizzle of steak on the grill. the manager's voice barking orders by the bar. But inside David, there was only silence. Narrator, he saw the truth, he saw their pain, he saw his failure. He thought of Emily's tired eyes, the cook's burned arm, the envelope of stolen tips. His chest felt tight, heavy. He took a slow breath. He felt anger, guilt, and something deeper, responsibility. Narrator, David Carter built this empire, and now he knew he couldn't wait any longer. He stood up, leaving cash on the table. His legs felt steady, his mind clear. He walked towards the kitchen door, each step harder than the last. But he kept walking. David stood near the staff hallway. He waited as Emily walked by, carrying an empty tray. "Excuse me," he said quietly. She turned, eyes tired but alert. "Yes, sir? Can you meet me in the storage room? 5 minutes." She frowned, unsure. I'm not allowed back there with guests." He nodded. "Just bring Megan with you, please." Emily hesitated. Then she nodded and walked away. David watched her speak to Megan, a petite waitress with dark hair tied in a neat bun. Megan glanced at David, eyes curious and cautious. The two women disappeared into the back hall. David took a deep breath. Narrator. He needed allies, and tonight he found them in the shadows. He pushed open the storage room door. The smell of cardboard boxes and cleaning supplies filled his nose. Emily and Megan stood together, silent, waiting. David closed the door behind him. David stood in the small storage room. Emily and Megan faced him, their aprons stained from hours of work. He took off his cap, ran a hand through his gray hair. Then he looked at them, eyes steady. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Megan frowned, crossing her arms. David took a deep breath. "My name isn't John," he said. "My real name is David Carter." Emily blinked, confused. Megan's eyes widened. David nodded slowly. "I founded Ironwood Grill 30 years ago." Emily's mouth fell open. She covered it with her hand as the tears welled up. Megan stared in silence. David's voice shook. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know it had become this." Emily's tears fell. All the pain, fear, and exhaustion broke free in quiet sobs. Narrator. For the first time, she saw the man behind the empire. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Megan stood still, watching David closely. He looked at both of them, his voice calm but heavy. "I need your help, I said. Emily sniffled. "Help with what?" David took a deep breath. "To fix this place," he said softly. "To fix what I let happen." Megan frowned. "How?" "I need proof," David said. "Proof of what's really going on here." Emily swallowed hard. "You want us to spy?" "I want you to tell the truth," David replied. "And if you can, record it." Megan glanced at Emily. Emily's hands trembled slightly. "What if they find out?" she whispered. David looked her straight in the eyes. "Then I'll protect you," he said. "I promise." Narrator. 2 waitresses, 1 billionaire, and a plan that could end it all. Megan held her phone tightly in her apron pocket. She pressed record. Her heart pounded in her chest. She walked into the back storage area where the manager stood, talking on his phone. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Just switch the supplier. The cheap cuts look the same once we grill them." He paused, listening. "I don't care if it's old stock," he continued. "They won't know. Customers never know." Megan's hands trembled. She kept her head down, pretending to arrange boxes of napkins. The manager ended the call and turned around. "What are you doing here?" he barked. "Just restocking," Megan replied, keeping her voice steady. He grunted and walked out, not looking back. She let out a shaky breath. Narrator. 1 recording, 1 truth, enough to burn down his lies. Megan slipped her phone back into her pocket. Her eyes narrowed with quiet resolve. David sat at a corner of booth, his back straight, eyes steady. He waved over the manager. "Sit down," David said calmly. The manager frowned. "Sir?" "I insist," David replied. "Order anything. The best steak on the menu." Unsure, the manager sat. Emily approached, notebook in hand. David spoke without looking at her. "He'll have the 40-ounce prime ribeye. Medium rare?" Emily nodded and walked away. The manager forced a smile. "Is there a problem, sir?" David didn't answer. He watched the kitchen as flames rose high behind the glass window. Minutes later, Emily returned with a sizzling steak on a hot iron plate. The aroma filled the table. The manager swallowed hard as he cut into the thick meat. David leaned forward slightly. Narrator. For years he fed lies to the people who trusted him. Tonight, David would feed him the truth. The manager chewed slowly, eyes darting with unease. The manager wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked up at David, trying to smile. "This is, really good," he said nervously. David didn't smile back. He leaned in closer, his eyes cold and steady. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. The manager shifted in his seat. David took a slow breath. "I'm David Carter," he said, "founder of Ironwood Grill." The manager's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. David's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You've stolen from my staff," he said. "You've poisoned my customers." He paused, looking down at the half-eaten steak. "Enjoy that bite," David whispered, "because after today, you'll never eat here again." Narrator. One sentence, a meal that had tasted like fear, and the beginning of his end. The manager sat frozen, his fork trembling in his hand. The next morning, David stood in the main dining room. Managers from every shift lined up in front of him. Their faces were tense. Some avoided his eyes. Others looked defiant. David held a folder in his hand. Inside were reports, video clips, and voice recordings. He took a slow breath. "This restaurant was built on honesty," he said. His voice was calm but carried weight. "And you have broken that trust." He handed the folder to HR. So now there's HR standing beside him. "Effective immediately," David continued. "You are all terminated." Gasps filled the room. One manager stepped forward, his voice shaking. You can't do this." David looked at him with steady eyes. "I just did." Narrator. Years of silent corruption ended in one morning. For the first time in a long time, justice walked these floors. David turned away as security escorted them out. He felt the weight lift from his chest. Emily walked into the dining room tying her apron. She froze when she saw David standing near the counter. In front of him sat a metal box filled with cash envelopes. "Emily," he called softly. She walked over, heart pounding. David handed her an envelope with her name on it. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a thick stack of bills. Tears filled her eyes. I don't understand," she whispered. "It's your tip money," David said. "All of it. Every dollar taken from you." Her shoulders shook as she clutched the envelope to her chest. "And starting today," he continued, "your pay is doubled." Emily covered her mouth, tears falling down her cheeks. And narrator, for years she worked in silence. Today, her worth was finally spoken. She looked at David, eyes full of gratitude and disbelief. He gave her a small nod. For the first time, Emily smiled without forcing it. A week later, David stood on the small stage in the dining hall. Staff from every shift gathered, their faces filled with hope and curiosity. Emily stood beside him, wearing a crisp white blouse instead of her old apron. David cleared his throat. "Today, we begin something new," he said. "Something that should have existed long ago." He turned to Emily, eyes warm. "This is Emily Johnson," he announced. "She will lead the Ironwood Foundation." Murmurs filled the room. Emily stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly. "The foundation will protect staff rights," David continued. "Tips will be transparent, benefits will be fair, and your voices will be heard." Emily took a deep breath. She looked at her team, her friends. "We're not just servers or cooks," she said softly. "We're the heart of this place, and it's time we're treated that way." Narrator. A waitress became a leader, and a restaurant became a family again. Emily stood at the podium. The staff clapped around her, their faces bright with hope. She held the microphone with steady hands. Behind her, David watched silently, a small smile on his face. Narrator. She once dreamed only of paying rent. Now, she leads a movement that will change an entire industry. Emily took a deep breath. She looked out at the team, cooks, dishwashers, servers, bussers, people she once stood beside, tray in hand, feet aching. Now, she stood for them. Narrator. When one voice dares to speak, many others find courage. She closed her eyes for a moment. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek, but when she opened them again, they shone with strength. Narrator. Emily Johnson, waitress, mother, leader, proof that true power that comes from honesty. For years, their voices were ignored. Their pain stayed hidden behind forced smiles. Emily stood in front of the team, her eyes bright with quiet power. David watched from the back, pride warming his chest. Staff clapped around her, hope filling the room like morning light. Narrator. One waitress spoke 4 words that changed everything. "This place is a trap." Because she spoke, hundreds found their freedom. The camera moved across each face. Cooks, bussers, dishwashers, their eyes filled with relief and belief. Narrator, what about your team? Do you hear them? A quiet pause. Comment, I hear them if you believe in the power of listening, because sometimes listening is the first step to true change. The screen faded to black. Soft piano notes lingered in the silence.